Hello and welcome to the Online Checks for Schools and Academies presentation by HR Connect. So firstly, why do we need to include online checks in the recruitment process? Keeping Children Safe in Education 2022 has a new paragraph at 221 which states that schools and academies should consider carrying out online searches as part of the recruitment checks for shortlisted candidates. You can see this on the slide now. The word should in statutory guidance means that you should do it unless you have a good reason not to. If you do have a good reason not to, it is also wise to have a written rationale for this. Breaking down this statement, should consider is not the same as should undertake. In other words, you could consider doing online checks and decide they are not appropriate. However, it is difficult to think of many situations, if any, in which you might decide not to undertake the checks. An online search is not the same as a search of candidate social media activity. The consultation draft of Keeping Children Safe this year included references to social media searches, but the DfE withdrew this from the final version based on consultation responses regarding employment law and potential for discrimination and bias. However, we do feel that it would be very difficult for you to carry out online searches without looking at social media accounts that are in the public domain. Your school will need to make the decision on what checks you want to carry out. Your processing condition under GDPR UK and the DPA 2018 is that this is a regulatory requirement, therefore you do not need consent. However, the candidates do have a right to know beforehand that this search will be conducted if they're shortlisted, so this needs to be reflected in your recruitment policy and advert. So let's take a look at the reason why this change has been included. A primary school in West Oxford employed a teaching assistant from Spain. Unknown to them, the employee was a convicted murderer who, along with a friend, lured another girl to a deserted location and brutally stabbed her to death in southern Spain in 2000. Gonzalez was 16 at the time of the crime, and she was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the murder. She arrived in Oxford in 2016 in her mid-30s and successfully secured a role at the primary school where she worked for over a year before the crime was uncovered by an anonymous complaint made to Crime Stoppers. The school had carried out all of the required safer recruitment checks prior to her appointment, in line with keeping children safe in education, but as a result of the rules under Spanish law that all crimes committed by minors are considered spent convictions and can therefore be expunged after the offender reaches 18, there were no red flags by the normal recruitment checks that would have alerted the school to Gonzalez's conviction. However, had an online check been carried out, then it is likely that such information would have come to the school's attention, and hence the government decision to amend Keeping Children Safe in Education to include the requirement for online checks to be carried out against shortlisted candidates. As a school's HR provider, we also have experience of where schools have carried out these searches, which has led to information being discovered that questions the candidate's suitability to work with children, and therefore we have looked at providing you guidance on how to manage this new process. The link to the article in 2019 is also shared on this slide if you would like to look at more details. Schools and academies are now advised to update your recruitment policy. We are working with Kent Teach to ensure that a statement is displayed on all adverts you place with them, alerting candidates to the new online checks. However, if you place adverts on other sites, such as your own website, you will need to ensure that you display a statement regarding the checks. Schools should have this in place from the 1st of September, so therefore you do need to act quickly on this. You need to consider if you are going to undertake these checks by a manual in-house process or to engage a specialist pre-employment check provider. Providers are charging between £20 and £45 per candidate if this is the option you choose. The guidance is clear that searches must only be carried out on shortlisted candidates. However, this may change the amount of time that you need between shortlisting and interview, as you will need to receive the self-disclosure form back, then carry out the checks, and also possibly have conversations with candidates. We have made changes to the self-disclosure form, asking for this to be returned within 48 hours of sending to allow you the time that you need. It is a reasonable assumption that in the future, Ofsted may well look into this as part of their inspections in school, but at present, you do not need to add this to your single central record. But you do need to show in your recruitment checklist that it has been carried out and keep the checklist in HR files if the candidate is appointed. The LGA have stated that as part of an Ofsted inspection, the school's single central record will be checked to ensure pre-employment checks have been carried out. Part of the due diligence checks will be the internet search. However, we are aware that schools are concerned that guidance is not prescriptive on how far back to look, and are worried that this will be identified as a failure by Ofsted. The LGA put this question to the DfE and understand that Ofsted have said their inspectors would not normally go into that level of detail when looking at due diligence checks. We have also been advised that the Ofsted handbook will be updated shortly. Whilst this is a message that has been presented at present, it is our view that if Ofsted did uncover any kind of safeguarding issues within the school, then they will look in a lot more detail at the checks that have been carried out. So whilst this is not a requirement, we do advise that schools keep good records of the check, who did this, what was the outcome, and what decision was made if to appoint. The guidance is clear that searches need only be undertaken on shortlisted candidates. Searches should not be undertaken prior to shortlisting, as doing so would not only be in breach of the statutory guidance, but may also give rise to potential claims of unconscious bias and unlawful discrimination. All candidates, regardless of the post which they are applying for or the nature of the contract, should be subject to an online search. This includes temporary, relief, directly employed staff and supply staff. Where a school engages staff via a supply agency, they should seek verification from the agency that all necessary pre-employment checks have been carried out, including the new requirement for online searches. We have also amended our agency supply checklist letter to reflect this. There is no expectation that existing employees or those that move between roles within the same school should be checked. However, you may wish to include the same statement for any internal vacancies, and please ensure this is reflected in your recruitment policy so that you're being consistent. These are the most popular search engines in the UK. It is recommended that you use different ones as they may yield different results. The new requirement is only for publicly available sources of online information to be checked. These search engines were the key place to start in identifying any significant issues or incidents in the public domain. The search engine results may then lead the school to review the content of publicly available social media pages and profiles on sites such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube for any posts or images which may question the suitability to work with children. There is no expectation that schools seek to access information that is locked down in private accounts. To assist in identifying the correct individual, it would be reasonable for the school to ask candidates to confirm all names, handles and tags by which they are known. With common names, particular care should be taken to ensure that any concerning information identified relates to the candidate and not to others with similar names. We have also made amendments to the self-disclosure form to allow a candidate to add anything that they think could be identified as an issue if found via an online check, and also to provide names and handles to allow the school to ensure they have the correct person. The guidance does not specify a time span over which the search should be conducted. However, it would be reasonable that a period of no more than 6 years is considered. Again, all candidates should be treated consistently in terms of the time span to be considered. If your school has decided to carry out the online checks in-house, it is recommended that the checks and collation of the information is carried out by someone not involved in the recruitment selection process. The potential risk of bias and discrimination is reduced by tasking someone not directly involved in the decision-making process. The information obtained should then be passed to the recruitment panel for discussion and exploration. Any of the findings should be validated with the candidate and explored. If the issue incidents identified are serious in nature, a conversation prior to interview is recommended. If the issues are not so serious, they can be discussed during the interview itself. We advise that a record is kept of the decision-making process, and we have created a risk assessment template for you to use. Candidates' online presence can take a variety of forms, such as words and statements expressed and posted by the candidate, pictures, photographs, images and videos created and/or shared by the candidate, articles re conduct, behaviour, actions of the candidate. If you locate evidence in any of these forms, it should be recorded. You will be looking for evidence from these searches that would lead you to question the candidate's suitability to work with children and/or could harm the reputation of your school or trust. Schools should refer to the self-disclosure form to see what, if anything, has been disclosed and if this relates to what has been located. Further specific guidance about what to look for is contained in our online recording form, which is part of our guidance notes. If you are unsure about something you find while searching, we would recommend that you record it and pass it to the recruiting panel to enable them to make a decision about the information. Please be aware that any information gathered or comments made during this process could be disclosed if requested under a subject access request. Whilst there are no legal issues specifically in relating to checking social media, as the information you are checking is being publicly displayed, you do need to ensure that the information found throughout online searches is not used to unlawfully discriminate against a candidate or result in any unconscious bias during the recruitment process. An example could be if a candidate's social media reveals that they are pregnant, but they have not yet shared this with you prior to interview. To remove that candidate from the interview shortlisting based on the fact that they are pregnant will amount to sex, pregnancy and maternity discrimination. Their pregnancy does not cause any concern or prevent them from working with children, so this information is irrelevant to whether they should proceed in the recruitment process. The same applies to information relating to other protected characteristics such as gender, age, sexual orientation, religion, religious belief and race. Use the name that has been provided to you within the application form with the addition of any previous names they have been known by. You will need to undertake several searches for each shortlisted candidate. The following combinations are a suggestion for Jane Marie Brown from Rochester, Kent. There is space on the recording form to list the combination of names, handles, locations which have been searched. If you do discover information that you think is relevant, we recommend you take a copy of the link of the article and also take a screenshot and attach this to the recording document. This information will help those making the decision and allow them to have a discussion with the candidate. It should be remembered that the guidance is clear that online checks are only one aspect of the due diligence a school should undertake when assessing the suitability of candidates. References, DBS, disclosure checks, assessment of qualification, and crucially the interview all form important tools to aid the decision making. It is important schools do not make any immediate assumptions and decisions regarding the candidate's continuation in the recruitment process based on one concern that may have arisen. Recruiting managers should act fairly, consistently, and objectively in interpreting and assessing the relevance of any concern identified from online searches. Failure to do so may lead to allegations of unconscious bias and/or unlawful discrimination. Should the online search identify a concern, it is important to understand the content in which the incident arose. For example, how recent was the concern? How old was the applicant? How relevant is the concern to the role which they have applied? And were there any mitigating factors that need to be taken into consideration? Schools also need to be mindful that some candidates may choose to lock down all aspects of their social media presence and have no visible footprint. It is important to remember online searches do not replace the need to question the candidate's suitability to work with children and their motivation and attitude. Questions should be asked of all candidates as part of the interview process. We advise that before any decision is made, the panel should speak to the candidate to validate the information found and to give them the opportunity to explain. It is important to allow the candidate the opportunity to explain the issue from their perspective, including their attitude towards the concern and any mitigating factors, before the school determine whether to allow them to continue in the recruitment process. If the evidence found is of a serious nature, the recruitment panel can take the decision to end the candidate's recruitment process and not proceed to an interview. We advise that the risk assessment is completed and the decision is recorded as to why the candidate was not progressed to an interview. The panel will also be required to speak to the candidate to explain their decision not to pursue any further. If the evidence is less serious, the panel can also choose to speak to the candidate about the evidence that has been found at the interview, then completing the risk assessment before making any firm decisions about the candidate's suitability for the role. Schools are encouraged to keep objective records of their decision making. It is recommended that a risk assessment is undertaken to determine the factors which have been considered when reviewing the findings. Where recruitment managers believe that online information identified makes the applicant unsuitable for the school, they may wish to seek guidance from their HR provider regarding any risks or challenges that may arise if you are withdrawing the candidate from consideration. We're now at the end of our presentation. Thank you for your time. We hope this gives you a quick overview of the changes that you and your schools need to make to comply with the changes to Keeping Children Safe in Education 2022. If you are a HR Connect HR customer, you'll now be able to access the updated recruitment policy, the new guidance notes, the new recording form, and the new risk assessment on the ServiceNow portal. If you are not a customer, please visit the website on screen if you wish to purchase any of the documents. If you have any questions, please contact us. We will be happy to help. Thank you.